Okay.
Special job. Nobody else was asked to do
You
that.
can tell him when he's saying something wrong too. You can
Correct it.
Roger, that's not right.
Okay. So I'm just going to say today's date, which is August 3rd, 2019. And if you could introduce yourself, say who your parents are and who your kids are,
Okay,
that would be great. And then we can just roll from there.
okay.
Should we test this and make sure it's recording?
It is recording. It says it's recording. Quiet, Kendall.
Is it on yet?
Yes.
What's they say? Measure twice, cut once.
I'm Roger
saying,
Clay,
She might not be wrong.
and my parents are Donald and Rosie Clay, and I have 4 children, Becky, Rita, Bobby Joe, and Crystal. And I was born in Indian Valley, Virginia in 1936, January the 11th, 1936. And times was rough in Indian Valley at that time. There was no money. It's coming out of the Great Depression, and everybody, my dad worked for 15 cents an hour 1 week, and the next week, in order to keep that job, he had to work free. And that was picking up rock in the farmers' fields and hauling them to a crusher to make roads in Indian Valley more passable. We lived in a one-room house, well, with a kitchen on the lean-to, a kitchen on the side. The living room, bedrooms for all us kids and all was in one room, and we were known as the Rich Clays. And we was very close to our grandparents. They did a lot for us and with us. Grandma Cox was one of the best cooks in the time, and I was the first baby in their outside of their generation, and I called her homemade light bread Mama Cox baby cake, and it was truly that good with a little butter on the. You couldn't eat anything any better. But now, she was a lovely lady, and she loved me to death, as well as my 2 aunts, Dorcas Elaine and Lois Jean, was home, and they spoiled me to death. But Grandpa Cox, we were afraid of him. Absolutely afraid of him. He was, a few words and very short at times. And so we stayed out of his way. It was fun to watch him eat, though. He'd never come into the table till it was ready, and they'd say it's ready, and he'd come and sit down. He picked up a knife, and he picked up his fork, and he started eating. Never laid him down till all the food was gone. He gets up from the table and goes back into the living room. So we always thought that was fun. Another thing, though, on my dad's side, on the Clay side, my grandpa Clay was the one that we loved to death. He was kind of like my father. He liked to tell jokes and all. And Grandma Clay, she was stern. And so it was opposites. But Grandpa got me in my first trouble. Dad always said, if you get a whipping at school, you're going to get another one when you come home. Well, Grandpa come down just a little bit before Christmas, and as usual, I was hanging around him and climbing up on his lap. And he says, Roger, what was you doing when you got that whipping? And I told him, and Dad looked at me, you didn't come home and tell it. Now, that was my first experience of getting caught. Along about that time, Dad didn't have any money, and there's none to be had. And he got a job milking cows on a dairy farm in Body Top County, and we moved to Body Top, down as close to where you see the exit for Troutville. If you went up and went right, that's the first farm up there is where we lived. We stayed there almost 2 years. Anyway, it was time for me to go to school, and the Second World War was going on. And so Dad moved back to the farm and got a couple more cows so he would qualify to stay home and raise kids and milk cows. So the farm was too little to support us. So he found a man that wanted to buy the little farm up on Indian Valley, and we moved to Willis, which is about 18 miles up the road, on a farm that actually Dad had lived on at one time with Grandpa and Grandma when they was hired to come down and stay with a lady that didn't have anything and needed someone to take care of them. And so anyway, Dad bought that farm, and we was able to expand the cows, but we did not have any electricity. We milked like this, and 15, 20 cows, and sometimes Dad would be out in the field helping someone work or something, and I have milked all the cows by myself.
How old were you then?
I was about 11 years old, 12 years old. And so anyway, that was really kept us going though, was the cows. And Becky wanted me to tell you about how that they preserve food. One of the things that is fascinating about them was they would take a head of cabbage and wrap it in newspaper and put it in a barrel. They'd put apples like that. They'd wrap them and put them in the barrel, and they would use this when they got the barrel full. They would bury it in the ground. And at Christmas time, we had fresh cabbage, we had fresh apples, and it was a treat because most people didn't. They didn't go to that much trouble. Dad was a stickler that his children was to have good food. We had milk we sold milk, but we had milk to drink. He said, my children needs milk first. I'll sell what's left.
That wasn't true for all the children, was it, Dad?
No, that wasn't. They didn't have milk. Their parents sold the milk because they could get some money out of it. Also, we had eggs. When we sold eggs, at one time we had 250 laying hens. But we always had eggs. So our parents fed us good.
And you said you were the youngest, right?
Oldest,
You were the oldest.
yes.
So
I
Pawpaw,
got to help milk first. I got to help hoe the corn first.
Pawpaw, were you going to school then too? And were you working in the morning?
Yeah, we would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and milk cows. Then we would get ready to go to school. As I told Becky the other day when she was here, we smelled like silage. But all the other boys smelled like silage too, so you didn't know who stunk. But anyway, that was how that life was. And in 1940, is it still recorded?
Yeah.
In 1947, we got electricity in Willis. And the first thing that we got was Dad bought a washing machine and a refrigerator. from Mom.
Wow.
That was a treat. And it was such a treat that we would, a neighbor lady, Mom would wash like on Mondays, a neighbor lady would come down on Tuesday and use our washing machine because they didn't have washing machines yet. Now it was something else to watch how they wired the house, because the house was not made to run wires through them. And they took staples and put them up the walls and come across. And anyway,
Did you have light in the house?
then,
Yeah, like light bulbs?
yeah. hmm But it was just a single bulb, something like what's over Meg's head there, but not that big. The Rita wanted me to add this to it. She told me this morning about the lights. Me and Lowell had never had lights before, and we slept upstairs. And so we went up to go to bed. And this, someone come to see my dad. And he walked out the front door and was talking to him out front. Well, me and Lowell couldn't see him, and we was sleeping in the raw. And we turned the light on behind us and went to the window to see out. Well, I guess someone else saw, not us. The thing that, Josh, that I really remember, though, was in 1950, in the spring. I went downstairs and Mom and Dad was in a conversation at the kitchen, and Dad said, "Rosie, God woke me up last night and said, you've been called to preach, and you're to go to see Mike Reed today. I have woke him up and told him that you was coming today." So Dad went and saw Brother Mike, and whenever he saw him coming, he says, "I knew you was coming, Donald, because God woke me up last night and said, Donald Clay's coming to see you today. I have called him to preach." Brother Mike was kind of over several preachers. And so he did the paperwork and all, and got Dad signed up to preach. And then the load on the farm came down to us boys. And Lowell, being just very small, and Kendall just hadn't started school yet, I got most of the load. And I still went to school. I milked more cows, and shortly after that, we got milkers. They was bucket, but they was run by electricity, and you didn't have to squeeze them out, and that was a blessing. But we had to plow the ground. Dad would preach a revival somewhere, and he would get in about 2 o'clock in the morning from wherever he was preaching. He'd get up and help milk on 4, and then go and help some with the farm work, and then at 2 o'clock he'd go back in and prepare his sermon for the next night. He actually was responsible for baptizing almost 3,000 people in his lifetime. He was a different person. He had a loud voice. We didn't have speakers like preachers has today. But his voice carried. He didn't need speakers. And he preached from West Virginia, and North Carolina mainly, of a summertime. And then he became a pastor of a church in Colson, and this is where Becky remembers him more than anything, and Rita, because they stayed with him a whole lot. But when he became a pastor, he only preached 2 or 3 revivals a year. and the rest of the time he was involved with his local church. And but I know that he was really a hard-working man. He was a wonderful man, and my mom was a wonderful wife because she took care of canning food. She made some of the best grape juice that you could ever get. Right, Becky?
Yes.
It was
She
great.
did. Everything.
And she taught her children to work too. I remember making kraut and putting it in a 5-gallon crock, and we'd punch it down, and then we'd take it and put it in a spring branch and keep it cold. And then after it set for so long, well, she'd can it. But this is how that she kept her family fed.
Why don't you tell a little about her sewing skills too? Because she kept you kids well dressed too.
She really did. I remember the first time I went to school, I went with Paulita, my aunt, to a little one-room school in Floyd County, and Mom made me a little outfit. Let's see. You can see a picture of it up there. You want to bring it over back and let it come on the camera? This was what she loved. What I looked like. I looked like a little preacher boy going to school. And the teacher, I hadn't started school yet. I went with Paulita to know what school was going to be like. The teacher brought me up in front of the class and says, "Boys, this is what you should dress like to come to school." Well, you know what the boys did? They laughed and made fun of me because they had all up ragged overalls and holes in their shirt sleeves and all that. But because that's the way people had to dress back then. But that was something else.
Tell about Glenna's little dress that she got for Christmas one year from that Grandma made, that special little dress.
Right. Glenna, Mom always made something for us for Christmas. Like she made me a little shirt, and Dad would always buy a pair of jeans. But she made Glenna a cutest little dress, and she also got her some little doodads to use, like a pair of scissors and different things.
How old was Glenna?
Glenna was probably about 4 years old. And Glenna, who was so tickled to get those scissors, but Mom dressed her in the dress first. And anyway, Glenna was playing with her scissors. Well, first thing you know, she'd cut little notches out in that new dress that had never been wore. And Mom said, "Oh, Glenna, what have you done?" She says, "I'll just go down in the woods and let the foxes eat me." And so Dad said, "Okay, I'll lead you down to the barn. And when you get to the barn, I'll stand till you go out of sight." So he led her down to the barn. Glenna started down through the field, and she got down there just a few feet. All at once she turned and come back crying her eyeballs out. "Daddy, I don't want the foxes to eat me." But that was one of the cute things that happens. But I'm sure that many times Glenna wished she had wore that little dress. But Mom always dressed us boys just like we were little preachers going to church. And one thing that always got me when we'd be going to, well, let me tell you first about how we went to church first. For several years, Dad would go down and hook the horses to the wagon and put some hay up in it. Now, it was not baled hay, it was loose hay because there's no such thing as a hay baler. But he'd put some hay up in And us kids would get in the wagon, and he had a seat across it that him and Mom would sit on, and that's how we went to church. It was, if it was very bad or raining, of course you didn't go because you didn't have nothing to cover up with. But then we got the first car after, let's see, we moved to Williston in 46, so I guess 48 we got a Model A Ford car, which was made in 1928. And we were lucky to have that because there's no cars being made yet. And since everything was going to the war. And so that was nice to have a Model A Ford to go in. It went cluck right down the road. And then in 1949, Dad got a 1941 Ford. And it was really, we thought we'd died and gone to heaven because it was such a good car compared to anything else that you could get.
Mm-hmm.
But see, it was already old. So that was kind of some of the things that happened in growing up. My first job was with Rosie's 5 and 10 here in Christiansburg. That was in 1954, right after I graduated from high school. And I worked there until Christmas. And then after Christmas, they laid off most of the help because they didn't have that many sales. So anyway, they offered me a job in North Carolina, and I didn't want to go to North Carolina, so I looked for another job. And I went to work in Willis Gulf Station in 1955 at $45 a week. And that was what I thought was good money back then. It was more than I'd ever seen. And of course, I worked there until 1956.
What did you do there, Dad?
And I greased cars, I pumped gas, and wiped windshields. Back then you wiped the windshield and you actually raised the hood and checked the oil. That's the only way you sold any oil. So, and the cars did use oil back then. It ain't like the cars today that you can go 3,000 or 4,000 miles and not need oil. But that was my job there, and I was considered the manager. I had another guy that come in part-time after school or something.
How old were you?
I was 54, or how old would I have been in 1936?
18 years old.
They, sorry. But anyway, the Thomas Motors and Floyd, Mr. Carly Keith come by one day and he said, Roger, I need someone in the farm equipment place, and I would like for you to come to work for us. And I said, well, how much does it pay? And he said, I'll pay you $37.50 a week. So I knew in the Gulf Station it was limited. When Mr. Keith come by and offered me the job at $37.50 a week, I took it because I thought there might be a future in it. And so, I've got 2 recordings. So anyway, I enjoyed working with the farm equipment. I learned how to set the plows to plow. I learned how to, there was more to it than just hooking it to a tractor. It was the way that I could sell a tractor if I could get the competition to go in the field with me to plow. I always got the sale because I knew how to make that plow, and they didn't. So anyway, I worked there for almost 3 years, and I kind of got batted around. because both Mr. Keith and Mr. Thomas had a farm. I knew how to bale hay. I knew how to do anything else on the farm. So the thing that actually caused me to really get serious was one morning before I went to work, I got a telephone call from Mr. Keith, and he said, "Will you come by my house as you go to work?" He wanted me to help him stack up some lumber. So I helped him stack up the lumber. I get down to the dealership, and Mr. Thomas smoked a pipe. And he was out walking around in the front of the building. I knew he was mad. He said, "Where you been?" I said, "Carly called me and wanted me to come by and help him with something." And he said, "Well, I want you to go and spread some fertilizer for me." I said, "Okay." Now, I was the only man working in the tractor place. It was small, and I was the only employee. I went down and I spread fertilizer. I got done at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. I drove the tractor back up to the dealership, and during the day, a freight truck had delivered what we called a spring order of parts. It was a whole lot of them. The dealership was locked up. The parts was sitting in the driveway. No one, they didn't get no one else to put them in. There they sat. I opened the door and started carrying them in. A Ford man pulled up. He was on the way back to Roanoke. He lived down there, and he pulled up. He said, "What are you doing here this late?" And I told him. I said, "I'll tell you what, though, they'll never do me like this again. Tonight, when I get through, I'm going to stick the key under the door, and I won't be back." I said, "I've already been offered a job over at Christiansburg by the dealer there, and I'm going over there." He says, "Roger, don't do that." He said, "He's an alcoholic, and I don't think you need to get involved over there. But I tell you what, I got a man that will call you tomorrow that wants to talk to you because I've told him about you." So the next day, Mr. Turpin from Whitfield called me, and he said, "I would like to talk to you Sunday after church." And so I drove to Whitfield from Willis, or over in Floyd County. I drove up to Whitfield, and I talked to Mr. Turpin. He showed me what I would have to work with and who had told me who all would be assigned to me and what he wanted me to do. And he told me, he says, "And I will give you $300 a month, from $37.50 a week to $300 a month." Was quite a raise. But in addition to that, he says, "And I'll pay you a commission on what you sell." So anyway, the first month I was there, I drew $600.
Wow.
And it actually went up after that. But that was real good. Now the $37.50 a week that I was getting in Floyd was not that bad as far as that goes, because I could get a week's groceries for $5. So
Wow.
if you put it in context, $5 a week for groceries, but the groceries didn't cost any more in Whitfield than they did in Floyd. Now, whenever I told Mr. Keith I was leaving, I said, "I'll give you 2 weeks' notice, and then I'm going to load my stuff, and I'm going to Whitfield." And anyway, he he went on the whole week. He didn't do nothing about, or the 2 weeks, he didn't do nothing about finding no one. He said, come around the last day, he said, now you're not leaving, are you? I said, in the morning there's a truck coming to pick up my furniture, and we're going to Westfield. Becky was about a year and about 18 months old.
Mm-hmm.
Rita had just been born. And we
And how old were you?
I was 21. But I was made a manager of the tractor part of the dealership. They sold cars too. There's a picture on the wall up there of the car dealership at Christmas in 1959. And I was in it. Everybody was in it that worked for the company. But it went on, and it was very good working for him. He was a fair man, and he always had my paycheck ready. And he actually treated me like a son, to tell you the truth. He sent me to meetings, sent me to Detroit, everything, just like he was training me to be the manager, or I was the manager, and he was keeping me up to date. Now, all good things sometimes does change real quick, because this picture that I have here shows January the 7th, 1968, and that was the number of people that was working. He'd sold the car dealership, so he just had the tractors and the farm equipment. That was how many people was working there. In June, he had a severe stroke, and we didn't think he was going to live. Ford Motor Company didn't think he was going to live either. And they called me from Richmond, and they said, we want you to go to Detroit. And I said, what for? And they said, we have made application for you to be a development dealer in Westfield. We have all the paperwork ready. You drive to Richmond, we have a satchel of things, and they had a stack of papers that much that had to do with Roger Clay. Unbeknownst to me, they had been planning before that they was going to offer me something. And so that night, I flew to Detroit. There's a man met me at the airport. He became my chauffeur everywhere I needed to go. And they took me all over the Ford headquarters here and Ford Tractor over here. Anyway, make a long story short on that, I left from Detroit with a contract in my hand to be a dealer at Westfield. Now, we hadn't, no one had approached Mr. Turpin that this was going on. It was nothing behind his back, because the man was sick, he was dying, but he did snap out of it. But the man from Ford headquarters came down about 2 weeks after Mr. Turpin got better, so they could talk and all, and talk to him. And Mr. Turpin signed a contract to turn the dealership over on January the 1st, 1969, and it became Clay Ford Tractor. Now, I didn't know, I didn't even put a penny up. They financed it all. They bought it, they put me under a management contract. I think I got 50% of the gross profit, and then they paid interest on the investment. But I was well paid, and it was really a good venture. It was really good until 1982 when all the contractors went broke, house builders and all, and I was heavy and industrial, backhoes, wheel loaders, and things like that. And here they come, one repossession after another back on my lot. I didn't realize everything had been good. I didn't realize that I was 100% recourse. So they turned it all back on me. And the next 12 months, I paid $360,000 interest. And so that was really a tough blow.
Yeah.
And that's the reason we went out of business on Clay Ford Tractor. Now, we'd already disposed of the one in Withville, so we come down here with just a very small operation, me and Frida and 2 other people. And the next summer, we ended up having to close it all down. Well, I went to work for Adams Construction. Well, let me back up. In 1970, I met this girl, Frida. And in 1973, we were married, and we had 3 children then. We had Becky, we had Rita, and we had Joe. So, in 1976, Crystal come along. But during that time, in 1984, well, we moved here to Christiansburg in 1983. And so whenever we moved to Christiansburg, we moved one night. Frida went to Westfield that day, and they had a lady wanted to buy that house that we was living in. And so Frida went up there, and the banker gave her what money they would let us have. They attached part of it for Clay Ford Tractor debts. But they give her a check. And she called me and she says, "Roger, I have the check here, but I asked them when we had to be out, and they said you have to be out today." What are we going to do? She was just bawling her eyes out. So I said, "Don't worry about it." I said, Joe had enlisted in the Marines, but he couldn't go till he finished high school. So anyway, I said, when Joe comes in, he'd stay off because 2 of his buddies that talked him into joining the Marines had come in from basic training. I said, when he shows up, you keep him there, because I'm going to bring Philip that works down here. I'm going to bring him with me, and we're going to get a rental truck, and we're going to come and load it out tonight. So when I get up there, Joe was there, and he had those 2 Marines that just finished that bit muscle down at Paris Islands, and I stood at the back of the truck and I told them what to bring next. And Frida said, whenever I talked to her, she said, "Well, how am I going to pack all this stuff up?" I said, "You pack the kitchen. Don't worry about nothing else." And so they would bring all the stuff out of let's say our bedroom. When they would bring the stuff out of the bedroom, like the dresser and the beds and so forth. Then we brought the clothes out and laid them up on top of the dresser, so we didn't have to pack and unpack. And then the next room and so forth. We kept the mattresses back. We backed in here at midnight, and this house was not finished. This part down here had nothing been done to it. Me and Joe and Frida did this. It may not be perfect, but it's ours. But there was no carpet on the floor. But we moved in. We had a contract to buy it. And so the next morning, Frida had a migraine headache. It had been too much attention. And so Joe and Philip that worked for me went out and opened up the business and was there that morning because we was open till noon every Saturday. And I started carrying the stuff in, and they come when they locked up and carried in the heavy stuff. But that's when we got to Christiansburg. In '84 in May, I went to work for Adams Construction, traveling over Virginia and North Carolina. They call me Mr. Dipstick, the employees did, because the first thing I did when I pulled up beside a piece of equipment, I pulled the dipstick out, see how much oil was in it. And I had to drain the plugs on the rear axles and different things. I had to take the plug out and stick my finger in there and be sure that I could reach oil. And so anyway, that was my job through the summer till October, and that was, Frida didn't like that, and I didn't like it that much either because we didn't get to see each other, but I'd get here Friday night, leave on Monday morning, never knowing where I was going because I only answered to Mr. Weldon, the president of Adams Construction. And he would have a list, and he'd have a check sheet on each piece of equipment that was there. And I would have to check off each piece of equipment what I had checked and what I found. One interesting thing happened one day. I was working in the Roanoke stuff, and I went out on this job, and I went up to this brand new John Deere roller where they pressed down the asphalt. I went up to it and pulled a dipstick, and there's no oil on it. And I had oil in the truck. I filled the unit up, put the dipstick back in, set each oil can up on the platform, and went on. By the time I got that done, it was time for me to come home. Monday morning, before I went in to see Mr. Weldon, I went by the job, and Mr. Duncan, that was the manager there, I never will forget how he looked. He says, "I know why you're here." He said, "I'll tell you what happened. I know you have to turn this report in to Mr. Weldon, but I'll tell you what happened if you'll relay that to him too." He said, "I was trying to get the men enough hours, and it was raining, and I knew they couldn't work. So I told them to change the oil in the equipment." And he said, "There's too many people doing whatever one person should have been doing, and they got to playing instead of putting oil back in the vehicle or in the roller." So I went in and I turned in the report to Mr. Weldon. I don't know what he said to Mr. Duncan, but anyway, that was one of the interesting things that happened during that time I worked there. But Kendall, my youngest brother, was doing some legal work for Joe Crum in 1984. And he told Kendall, he said, "I'm looking for someone to manage the dealership that I'm buying in Parisburg, Virginia. I want someone that can manage the parts and service." And Kendall said, "Well, I know the perfect man for you if y'all can agree on the terms." So Kendall called and told me, and anyway, I met Mr. Crum in Kendall's office in October of '84, and he gave me an offer. It was very good, but it's pretty good drive each time. Before I went over there, I also went by and talked to Mr. Duncan at Duncan Ford. I told him that I was looking for a job, and he said, "Well, I want you, I really do, but I don't have nowhere to put you. But whenever I have the perfect place, I'm going to call you." So I worked for Joe Crum 84, 85, 86. In 1987, probably early in 87, Mr. Duncan notified me to come in and see him. I went in to see him, and he went through a lot of stuff, did a lot of talking, and didn't make me no offer. So anyway, I shook his hand and left, and I figured that was it. So about 2 or 3 weeks later, he called again. I went by, he did the same thing, and I didn't get an offer. Then about 2 weeks later or less, he called and said, I need you to stop by today. I told Frida, I called and told Frida, I said that Mr. Duncan wants me to stop, so I'll be late coming home. But I said, if he does me like he did the last 2 times, I'm never going back again. So when I get out of the car there, his sales manager met me at the door, and he said, Mr. Duncan has an offer today. So anyway, I was sitting down there waiting for him. He said, he'll page you in a few minutes. I've told him you was here. And I was sitting down there, and Mr. Duncan come on the intercom. He said, Glenn McGee, come to my office. Glenn McGee was going to be my supervisor. He was over me. Still was till I retired. But what had happened was a young lady that was working there had found out that I was there and they was going to hire me. And she had in her head that she was going to get that job. And she had went up to Mr. Duncan's office, and she was throwing a fit. Anyway, I don't know what all went on between them, because in about 30 minutes, Mr. Duncan paged me to come up. And that's when I met Glenn McGee. I never had seen him before. And also, Mr. Duncan gave me an offer, which was very good. Best thing was it had a retirement plan, which is paying us today. That was very good, and I spent 28 years working for Duncan Ford. The last 6 years, I went where Mr. Duncan said to go. I retired when I was 70 and a half years old, and Mr. Duncan said that day, he says, when you get your call from Social Security, you call me or come on back. I have an offer for you. His offer was just as good as what I was making, but the difference was if he had trouble in a dealership, I was to go. So I spent a lot of time going, and but I enjoyed that. One time that was really interesting was the parts manager and the service manager both walked out up at Pulaski. And here comes Glenn McGee, and he says, Roger, we have bad troubles in Pulaski. They both walked out, and you're the only man that we've got working for us that knows how to do the parts part and knows how to write the service orders and all that and price them out. So when can you be there? I said, when do you want me to be there? And he said, the keys is in such a vehicle sitting out front waiting for you. I drive up there and everything is in chaos. I stayed there 8 months before I went anywhere else, because we had to get someone, get them trained. And that's not easy. We think it's easy to pull into a dealership and want something done to our cars, but it's not easy. So anyway, that was some of the things that happened to me. And then I got to retirement in 2014. Frida was having some troubles, and I told him I needed to be with Frida. And so for the last almost 6 years now, I have been fully retired and taking care of my pride and joy here. And that's about this, what I have wrote down. Let's see. Yeah, I don't think I got anything else.
You said y'all met in 1970. How did y'all meet?
She was driving down the road, and I pulled in behind her, and she stopped. If she hadn't stopped, we wouldn't have met, I don't guess.
So she just stopped in the middle of the road and you ran up
She
and
just
said, hey?
pulled off the side, and we talked a little bit. And so that
What
was,
it grew into.
Yeah.
but it was good. We had a good marriage. Still has a good marriage.
Dad, what about you, for a person of your age, you have been very accepting of technology, and your business changed somewhat, didn't it, over the many years?
It really did. When I went to work for, no one had computers in 1984. They was beginning to get computers of a such. At Duncan Ford, they had a computer in the office, and they had a computer in the parts department, but you sold the part, you wrote it on the ticket. When the customer pays, you brought it around and someone had to type in the computer on the inventory. Now, the old computer would do the recommended inventory, but then to send it to Ford Motor Company to get your parts, you had to actually go up to a little, I don't remember what they called it. It's a little old bitty thing, kind of like a cell phone, but about that big. And you typed in your order, and then you hit a button to send it, and it went to Ford. That was computers back then. In '85, a company called ADP come out with a good program for farm equipment, but also for car dealers. It was tied everything together. You didn't have to retype everything. If you typed it once, it was in there, and it would do what it needed to do. So anyway, we talked. There was two companies bidding on the job. Well, I had worked with the people at ADP before when I was at Clay Ford Tractor, but what we had then, we had tear sheets. When you sold a part, you put a 1 over here, and when you got 4 ones, you put a cross across it, and you shipped that to Ford, and they would send back the order. But so I knew the people from ADP, and they did a good job explaining it, and I talked Glenn McGee into going along with me on it, and I said, that's a system we need for the parts and service. It may not be the part that we need for bookkeeping, but that's what we need for parts and service. And I said, that's what you need to push for. So we went with ADP, and they sent me to Atlanta, Georgia, to learn the system. I was down there for a week, and unbeknownst to me, what they was having me do was actually putting the records in to Duncan Ford. I was setting up the computer system down there. I thought I was just practicing. I was, but I was also setting it up for them. And then at the end of the week, I come back, and when the equipment come in, they come up and stuck some disc in, and it was exactly what I had just set up. And we had to do some extra typing because it'd been about a month there between what I was doing and what we were at that time. But it also, it became my duty to train the parts and the service writers. And that was more challenging than setting it up. But as David said when I retired, he said this. We wondered what Roger was going to say when we decided to go on computers, because we knew that he didn't have computer knowledge, but he said he dug in and did better than people that knew something about computers. And I was really happy at what he said about me. And the pictures that I'm going to give you, Josh, you'll find a picture of my retirement picture and him reaching me the iPad that's there behind
Kendall.
in the shelf right here.
Oh yeah. Right here.
Mm-hmm.
He gave me that iPad. That's been my toy for the last 5.5 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. And you were able to do your job in those final years with your GPS, you know, going around all the hollers and different little roads that who knew where they were sending you.
If I didn't have somewhere else that they sent me to do, they sent me out to find new customers. And Becky sent me a GPS. It was amazing. I could go like into Parisburg. Now I worked in Parisburg 2.5 years, but I could go into Parisburg and I'd tell them I wanted a garage, and you'd be surprised how many they'd find. I'd have a whole day just going around. And during that time, the part sales went from like $250,000 a month to 350, 360, and right now they're doing over 400. And it's all because of me calling on those customers. They'd never been called on before. No one had ever asked them for their business. But I pulled into the driveway. I went out and I said, I'm Roger Clay from Duncan Ford, and I'd like to talk to you about Ford and Mazda parts. And they couldn't believe it. And the first thing they said, well, how do I get them? I said, we'll deliver them. No one had ever delivered parts to them before. Right now in Christiansburg, Duncan and Schuler and First Team out here, they're crisscrossing each other, hauling parts to people. But before I started doing that, no one did. That was extra expense, but it was also extra profit. And that GPS was great for me during that time. I'd go into Roanoke. I found body shops in Roanoke that I sold parts to then that didn't like Berglund. Berglund had done them wrong. Or Magic City. I didn't get much complaints out of Magic City, but I did out of Berglund, and I got a plenty out of Schuler. But anyway, that was really something. Over in Floyd County, they garages everywhere over there. No one ever called on them. Now the truck goes every day to Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
And Hillsville, Galax.
If Rita were here, she'd be asking for a couple of stories, Dad.
Well, I see, I done give one of the stories, did I?
Did you give the one about making curtains?
No. I didn't want to do that shit. Now, I do have it wrote down here. I forgot it.
Forgot it.
Rita was a cute little girl, and she liked to tell the teacher stories. And I'm sure you're aware that I raised the girls. Their birth mother was very ill. And so the house didn't have curtains in the one room. So I got me some cloth, and I had a sewing machine. I got me some cloth and I cut out and made curtains. So the next day, Rita goes to school and they have, what was it, Share Day or
Oh,
something?
yes, yes.
Show
Sure.
and tell.
And of course Rita's hand went up. Says, my daddy made curtains last night. Oh.
And then the teacher let you know that she knew this about you.
Oh yeah, the teacher told me. The teacher was a friend. And she told me, she said, it's so cute. Rita was good about that.
What about the chickens you brought home that you got as payment for some farmer's bill that he couldn't give you money, but you brought these chickens home for your girls?
But I got a whole coop full of chickens, live, and it didn't suit me to butcher them that day. In fact, it ended up being probably 2 weeks before I had the time to butcher my chickens. And so they fed them. Rita and Becky fed them. They fell in love with the chickens.
Oh no.
Well, when I butchered them, I made them help me pull the feathers out.
Oh,
And you know what? Josh, they wouldn't eat none of my chicken.
That's horrible.
Every time we had chicken, even if I went to the store and bought fresh chicken, they thought that they was getting those old chickens.
The memory smell of the wet feathers.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was one of the wonderful things.
Yeah, it was.
What about the skunk you brought home that time, Dad? See how he raised his children?
The man that went to church with us was driving home from church one Wednesday night, and there was all these little skunks in the road. Someone had run over the mother skunk, and there was these little fellows. And so he picked them up and took them to his house and put them in the barn. Well, the little skunks didn't let stink yet. So anyway, he was telling me about it, and I said, I'd like to have that for. He said you could make kittens out of them, and I guess you could, because we kept a little skunk for a while. But anyway, he gave it to me, and he said you need to get it descented, and so he told me a man's name that would descent it. So I took the little skunk out there one day. Just before that, Mr. Turpin had come in, and he says, Roger, they having a political gathering over in Galax, and I'd like for you and George to go because there's going to be a lot of farmers there. So anyway, I knew I was going over there, so I took the little skunk out there to this man, and he says, now if you'll hold his hind legs, I'll cut him. And well, his knife slipped, and that skunk stink went right up through my hair. So I go home, and I get me a can of tomato juice, and I go over my body and all that, and I take 2 or 3 showers, and I didn't think I smelled. But anyway, I go out to the dealership, and George was there ready to go, and he says, Roger, are you ready to go? And I said, sure. We're going down the road, and I was driving, and George says, I keep smelling a skunk. I told him what had happened. They said, I'll tell you what you do. When we get over there in the meeting, I smell a skunk. And he says, everybody else will be looking someone else. And sure enough, they did. They really did. You ready?
What else do you have on your list over there, Dad?
I'm about out of it. she, Josh wanted that one about me going to sleep.
Yeah, I heard you got in trouble.
Well, I really was sick. I think is what she was referring to. I was in the first or second grade, and I was got sick at school. Come find out I had yellow jaundice,
Wow.
which is back then was very serious. But anyway, I get off the school bus and start walking home, and I was just sick. And I laid down under a tree beside the road, and I was so sick I went to sleep. And when I didn't get home, Dad come looking for me, and he actually carried me home. But but anyway, I got over that. But I didn't realize that stays in your system forever. I was given blood, but they was taking it and fracturing it. But then they notified me they didn't want no more of my blood. But that's what I think she was probably thinking about. But there's another one. I have a map right here. I'm going
Oh, good.
off where we lived and where I had to walk to school. And it was a good mile and a half, and a 6-year-old little kid with no one else walking with him. That was a long ways
To get to the bus,
to get to the bus.
you had to walk a mile or a mile and a half.
Hmm. And Lowell, this was in Lowell's papers. Lowell had made a map of it. It's not. There's a couple of things that's not right on it, but that's okay.
Said just like a brother.
Yeah, he'd say you were wrong about that.
He said I was wrong. But the thing off it was, when Lowell drew this, he was already having some dementia problems. So anyway, this was where I had to walk, and I missed the school bus. I probably intentionally, I wouldn't doubt that a bit, but because the lady up at the store called Mom. Now, we didn't have electricity, but we had telephones.
Why do you guess that was? They had strung the phone line?
They'd strung the phone lines, and the people that lived along would, if a line got down or something, they fixed it. You didn't have telephone trucks running around over the country. The old man that did most of the repair work for the telephone company actually had an old trappy car that he carried his tools around in, but he didn't need much of tools. The main thing he needed was those things to go on the legs with the spikes so he could go up the pole. But anyway, I get up almost to the store and the school bus goes by. And I turned and start back home. Miss Effie called Mom and said, Roger missed the school bus again.
Oh, wow.
And said
Tattletale.
he's on the way back home. Well, down about halfway between was a mill that was run by water wheels. And I stopped along the bank there somewhere, and I was sitting there eating my lunch. I was going to let the lunch go to waste, so I wasted lunch. So I was sitting up on the bank there eating my lunch, and Dad come after me. I think that's what good.
That's the story
Really?
I think Mom was thinking about.
Yeah. But anyway, we walked everywhere, or rode the wagon, horses. But we would walk up to follow a pathway between our house and Uncle Dewey's on Christmas. We would go to Uncle Dewey's, and Aunt Pearl never had any children. So Christmas lunch, we always went and eat lunch with Uncle Dewey and Aunt Pearl, and they shared our stuff. You know,
To eat.
No, they shared in our Christmas presents. We showed her Christmas present. I got the scar to show for it. I think I was 8 years old, and Dad gave me a knife for Christmas, a pocket knife. Well, Uncle Dewey said it's not sharp enough, so he sharpened it. I put the thing, see that scar right there?
Uh-huh.
It was that long now. Well, it looked worse than that on the little boy's leg. It was no bigger around than that.
Uh-huh.
Same as cutting the leg off. Mom tried to sew it up, and she couldn't sew it. My skin was too tough. So she poured it full of alcohol. I don't know how bad I screamed.
Oh my gosh.
But anyway, she poured it full, and she taped it up. Every day she would take the tape off and she'd pour it full of alcohol and tape it up. So it healed up from inside out. And so it's the gash shows that wide then still. But anyway, whatever we got, we took over and we shared. Like 1 year, Lowell got Tinker Toys, and I got a Lincoln log house set where you could build different buildings, you know. And Lowell, there was Dad and Uncle Dewey had a ball building things with this Tinker Toys. They could be, they come with a lot of different diagrams and all, and they could be. They had a ball with it. Lowell went over and pulled on Mom's sleeve. Said, next year get me something I can play with. And he didn't like the idea that he wasn't getting to play with his Tinker Toy. I don't blame him.
Yeah. Going back to that house you all lived in, that when you all moved to that bigger home and you and Lowell shared that room, that was a room that didn't have any heat, did it? Tell them what you did for that.
It was a long ways from heat. The house had a kitchen, and it's supposed to have been a dining room, but they used it as a bedroom because it was closer. They just heated the kitchen, and the heat would go into there from the stove in the kitchen. And so when me and Lowell slept upstairs and so we had to go out of the kitchen into a hallway, go down outdoors, go into a door, go down a hallway, go up steps, go down another hallway and into that room. There was no heat ever in that room. And anyway, we would put a brick on the kitchen, on the stove that was in the kitchen. They had a cook stove and a heating stove in there, and we'd put a brick on there, and it would be warm. And we'd wrap a towel around it, and we'd go head upstairs. Now we're covered up with what tick. They had feathers, chicken feathers in it, or goose feathers, or whatever, which was extremely warm. You didn't get cold, but it was cold when you first got in it, so we'd go to bed with a warm brick. And then get up the next morning, we would fly downstairs to where the stove was. But that was kind of, oh, I can tell you a cute story that happened in that house too. This is when Roger was at his finest. Glenna met this guy. He was a nice guy. His dad was a Methodist preacher, and anyway, Harold started writing Glenna letters. Well, and we had a room that we called a parlor. Everybody had a parlor for the girls to court in. And they had a living room over here and a hallway there, and then a parlor over here. Well, in the parlor was an organ, and it had a place there that you pull open, and back you could change the sound effects. But Glenna would take her love letters and put them in behind there. I didn't know that at the time, but I had finished my work and I had a book I was reading. So I went in there, in that room, and I sat back there on the couch and I was reading the book, and Glenna come in. She reaches in there and gets that letter out, and she sits there and reads it, and she puts it back in there and puts it back in behind there and leaves the room. Never did know I was in there. So I got up, I go and pull it open and get it out and I read it. Well, that night while I was eating dinner, old Big Mouth couldn't keep it no longer. He said something about something that was in that letter. She's crying, "Daddy, he read my letter!" That was the last whipping I ever got, Josh. And I was about 16 years old.
Really?
Yeah, that was my last whipping. But boy, I got a good one that day. You ain't supposed to read it. If you know it's there, don't you dare touch it again. You got any more, Becky?
I'm thinking. I'm going through it.
So you remember us at war in World War II? Do you remember that?
Oh, yes,
Oh,
I do
yes.
remember that. I remember that Uncle Colby, see, I was 6 years old in 42. Uncle Colby and Uncle Troy both went to service. Uncle Troy's still living. He'll be 100 years old this coming year.
Wow.
But they both went to service. Uncle Colby went to San Antonio, Texas for training. He was there 1 week and went to England. And his job was fueling airplanes. And so he fueled airplanes and went to on through, and he didn't get to come home till 46.
Wow.
Because the ones that didn't see combat didn't leave until all the combat soldiers had come home. And so he didn't see combat.
This was Uncle Colby.
Uh-huh.
This is
Dad's
Grandpa's brother.
And he come home in 46, and I know where I was the day that he come home. Me and Paulita was hoeing corn. My Aunt Paulita. And
Grandpa's sister.
yeah, and it was at Grandpa's cornfield. And Grandma come out and hollered and said, "They have just called me from Willis that that Colby got off the bus and he's walking home." Now he'd left his duffel bag and all at the store there in Willis, and he was just walking home because they took a horse and wagon and went back and got it, because even then we didn't have any vehicles. But anyway, he come home that day, but I remember that. He told a cute story too, Josh. They all, in England, they all had a bicycle. That's the way they got around over there. And well, this Englishman knew that they was leaving and they couldn't take the bicycle with them. And he come out and he offered them some ridiculous price, like 50 cents for each bicycle. And they told him no do. And he said, "Well, that's all, you all can't take them with you. What you gonna do with them?" They took them and went out in the middle of the airport runway. They piled those bicycles up. They poured poured fuel on them and set them on fire and let them burn there. And he said that old guy stood back there and cussed them to everything he could think of.
Why did they do that? Just to spite him?
Yeah, because he was wanting to steal them. He was, and so they burned them.
Do you remember when the war was happening? Maybe you were too young for this, but do you remember any sacrifices that people had to make? I know there were things about metal being confiscated. I remember there were things that things were different. Different factories operated differently during the war to make things for the war. Do you remember any of that?
I remember the things that affected us most was you could get no coffee you could get no sugar. I remember there was something called posting, that it was really burnt wheat. And they ground it up, and it, the main thing was it was black, I guess. It really didn't taste like coffee, but people drunk it. Dad drunk it. So anyway, that was gasoline. If you had a motored vehicle, you could get hardly any gas, but you could get a little bit. You had to be careful where you went or what you done.
Well, Dad, you were born during the Depression, and then the war was after that, and you were still so very young. Do you remember any kind of recovery that happened from the Depression during the wartime, or did things really not get better until way after the war?
It was bad all through, but after the war it was still bad. In '46, see, we still didn't have electricity in Floyd County. There was an area in Floyd County, they run a line from Christiansburg to Floyd, from Floyd to Galax. If you was within a few feet of the roadway, they hooked you onto the line, but otherwise you didn't have any electricity.
Dad, I want to take you back to your business too. In the early 60s, you told me a story about the highway department giving you a big contract. And it wasn't until you told me that story that I realized how many dirt roads were still a part of Virginia back in the late 50s and early 60s. And you and your business were able to be a part of what changed that part of Virginia. Didn't you sell some equipment to the highway, or did you fix equipment?
Oh, yes. We fixed, they were starting to build the interstate system. And we got a contract with a company that built from Tennessee on through here, at least to Roanoke, called Nella Otero. We got a contract with them to rebuild their equipment. And with the solid rock they was through this part of Virginia and all, they just broke the equipment up big time all the time. We had 3 and 4 people welding all the time on their equipment. The building that we had the tractor business in had a part in the back that was never closed in, that we was able to back those big machines up in, and so they could weld them. And we welded all through the winter time. The guys just put on enough clothes to do that. Oh, I have a cute story about this. You see how many people's in that picture? I told the Ford rep, I said, that's how many was there whenever Ford paid on Mr. Turpin. I told the Ford guy, I said, well, one thing for sure is I got plenty of people I don't have to go out and start looking for. He says, Roger, within a year, only one person out of that will be working for you. I said, you kidding me? He said, no. I said, well, they're working for me now. Yeah, but there's another man above you. And he says, whenever it's you, they won't like it, and they won't stay. He was right. This man right here on the end, George Kegley, was the only man working for me, and a year later. Now here is one of the reasons. This guy, I don't see him, right there. A customer called me, and he just bought a brand new manure spreader. And he called me at home, and he says, I need that spreader today, and such and such is tore up on it. And so I left my house. I drove to his farm. I took the power takeoff shaft off. I take it back to the garage and I give it to Norman to work on. Fix. He come and said it's fixed. I said, well, I want you to take it over to James Wright's house, to his barn, and put it on there. He said, I don't work on manure spreaders. I said, tell me again what you just said. He said, I don't work on manure spreaders. I said, Norman, if I'm not too good to go and take that power takeoff shaft off, you're not too good to put it on. It's either you put it on or you can get your toolbox. I was known to be a tough boss, but I had to be.
So he got his toolbox. He didn't go put it on.
He'd take his toolbox.
Mhm. Were you a lot younger than a lot of the other folks in that picture?
I was. You can look there. I'm the youngest
You
man
looked
there.
like a kid up there next to all of them.
Yeah,
So they had to deal with that, didn't they?
yeah. That was their problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, if you look on there too, I was the only man that had to wear a tie. But Mr. Turpin required that I wear a tie. He said that shows authority.
He was a
it
good
was-
mentor to you. He was a good mentor
He really
you.
was.
because those little things helped you see yourself differently.
But whenever he went out of town, the tractor business was a small part compared to the car business. And when he would go out of town, he didn't ask someone in the car dealership to go to his house and check on it. He come up and told me. And I had two little girls that just loved going. He had a prettiest bird dog, and they loved to go and feed that bird dog. But Mr. Turpin was good at mentor. But all these people was gone at the end of a year. But I took over January the 1st, but before, and at Christmas, just before that, there was a man knocked on my back door at home. I was fixing Christmas lunch for me and the two girls. And a man knocked on the door and he said, I heard that you are taking over the dealership and I would like to come back and work for you.
Huh.
And he became my service manager,
Who was that?
Burl Irvin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Burl Irvin came to work for me at Wythe County Motors whenever he got out of high school. I did a lot of training on him, showing him how to do these different things on the Ford tractors. And he left and went to Maryland and was working up there, but he'd heard about it. I said, when can you be going to work for me? He said, I got my toolbox in my car.
I was thinking about you went to Willis High School, right?
Yes.
Tell us a little about going to Willis High School. How big was your class?
Well, there was 40 officers. Is it on?
Yes.
There's 40 officers graduated into class. We only had one senior class, and there's 40 people. That was it. We had, I don't remember how many was girls and how many was boys, but anyway, I didn't make valedictorian. I really need to back up and say I didn't do very good in school and as a freshman and sophomore. But when I went into the junior year, there was a lady that I never will forget, Ms. Whiteside. She kept me after class, and she says, Roger, I watched you getting on the school bus to go home. You never take a book with you. I watch you in class. Now, I want to tell you one thing. If you will listen to me during class, I'll guarantee you'll make A's and you'll never take a book home. I told her the reason I didn't take books home, I had to milk cows. But anyway, she was right. I tried it one month. I got A's. I never had an A. I got A's. I said, if it works on English, it definitely will work on the others. So I started paying attention instead of being mean. And first thing you know, I had all A's. That was junior year. Senior year, I had all A's.
I'm asking that again.
Yeah. And Dad, we'd love to hear a story or two about your grandchildren. Because
Okay.
you have some great grandchildren stories.
Let me finish this other one. Whenever it come graduation time,
Oh, yes.
I did Watson valedictorian, a salutatorian. That went to 2 girls, but I got to make the speech too because I had the top grades of the boys.
Wow.
So I still have my speech up here in the box in the closet.
You do?
Yes, I
Oh, I'd
do.
like to see that.
I would too.
Me too.
I'll go get it in just a minute then.
Did you change some lives with that speech?
I don't know. I don't know. But anyway, I got to make the speech.
Yeah, just one question before you switch over to the grandkids' stories. Did that experience tell you that you were smart, or did you already know you were smart? Because before then, if you were goofing off in school, you weren't getting many messages from school, at least, that you were smart.
No.
Did that help you, having that teacher believe in you?
I think so. I think Ms. White's side, I give her credit for really changing me.
Yeah, she gave you a message there.
Mm-hmm.
You listened to it,
Right.
and then you saw the results.
Becky mentioned the grandchildren. Me and Frida talks all the time about this. We loved having all the grandchildren here at once because they had a chance to get to know each other. Jocelyn would always be here whenever y'all was coming, and Josh and Wesley, and each grandkid was different, and so some of them liked to follow Frida around. Blair was one of them. Granny, why do you do that? Granny, why do you do that? And Frida just loved it because she just followed her. Just so cute. Megan was different, but each one of you had your own unique way. Wesley, since he ain't here, I'll talk about him. He went around with his 2 fingers in his mouth.
Yes, he does.
Still does. You're not going to let Wesley have a copy of this, are you?
Yes, I
But they was all so cute, and you know we had a lot of years we had them all here. One year I remember I set up a tent right here, and me and Wesley and Jocelyn and Blair slept out there in the tent. Josh slept right here. Megan and Crystal and Frida slept upstairs.
I'm not surprised.
I never did enjoy sleeping on the ground to this day.
But they was trying to determine it wouldn't be safe for the girls to sleep out there. They didn't think of the boy because it was outside. Sometimes you have a skunk or something come by. But anyway, I said, well, I'll sleep out there with them. Yeah, Josh didn't want to. I said, well, you sleep on the couch. So
I can edit it out. Which one was your favorite?
each one.
Dad had a habit just like Grandpa Donald Clay, which was the youngest always got the current stories. So the youngest was always the favorite in that way because there were always cute little kids stories that were coming along.
Yeah, I'll tell you one on Crystal, and then I'll go look for that speech. Crystal, well, Kendall had a dump truck, still has a dump truck. He would take it over in Floyd to the sawmill and back it under the tipple and they sawed the wood up, and then the owner of the sawmill would pull it out to the side. Well, I would drive from Westfield after I closed up the dealership and go to, me and Crystal would go to Floyd and pick up the dump truck and take it back to Westfield and dump it and then take it back. That was a lot of driving, but we even took one load of wood down to Becky in Martinsville. But we had a good time doing that. But a little old store over here on the side of the road called Simmons Groceries, it's closed now. But we would stop there and get a can of beanie weenies, some crackers, and a pop. And we'd go over on the side of the road and back up and raise it. Had a little old Ford Fiesta. We'd raise up the deck lid and we'd sit back on the back and eat our beanie weenies and go on to get the truck.
That's tailgating now.
And that Crystal just loves that because she got to do something with Daddy. And it's just her and Daddy. Now, she's coming in on the 27th. She wants to, on the next day, will be Missy Day here. And she says, Daddy, I want to go out with you for something and let Frida and Missy be together till. So
she's going to get a daddy day.
She wants a daddy day.
Oh, well, she was definitely a daddy's girl. I think we all were. I think, she was the baby girl.
Oh, yeah. But
special.
all life you was special. And all the grandkids were. And we got some special great-grandchildren too.
Yes, we do.
And,
Yes, we do. They're fun too.
and we'll have a lot of stories for them in a few years, won't we?
Yes, yes.
But,
They're making them daily.
Now, if you want to stop it, I'll go find my speech.
I wanted to ask you real quick, because you didn't spend a lot of time on it, but you brought up your grandparents and some of those early memories, and I'd like to know as much as you can remember about them and what they did for a living and what they did for fun and whatever.
I don't think, Josh, there was any fun back then. Everybody was really serious because actually they were poor. They, of course, the only thing there was to do in Floyd County was farm. There was no businesses. It was there was some mills that ground feed, but they took a part of the feed for the pay of grinding it. They didn't get any cash. They one way they got cash was to sell what they kept. So everything was tough back then. Grandpa Cox lived back in about as far as you could go in the Indian Valley before you would go into Carroll County. He would leave off a morning. If he had business at the courthouse or something, he would leave there, walk down to the road that run from Radford to Willis. He'd walk up through there and then walk all the way to Floyd, which was 11 miles. He would walk all the way down there if someone didn't pick him up. But everybody knew him, and they see him walking, they'd stop and pick him up. And sometimes he might ride with 2 or 3 people before he got to Floyd. Well, Becky had just been born, and he knew it, and he knew where I lived there in Floyd. He knocked on the door in Floyd and says, I want to see my grandchild. And
That's a pretty big deal because he was very uncommunicative, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He was kind of a more closed, private person.
Right.
Is that
And,
just his personality, or just because of hard times, or?
maybe a little of both. I think it had to do with, I think his parents was that way, and so forth. I really do.
And he raised 6 girls.
Ah.
So it must have been very interesting.
8.
8, I'm sorry, 8.
They
It must have been very interesting in their home with him. Like, maybe he just shut down over time.
He just couldn't get a word in with all those
Couldn't
ladies.
get him. I mean, there was a lot lot
gave up.
of estrogen, yeah.
Hey, certain girls became boys though in the growing up.
Get the
Aunt
work done.
Eulalia went and helped in the field, and Aunt Osie did, but she was the oldest and she got married first. But the son-in-laws would go back and help too. Dad would go back and help.
What about his corn? Wasn't there something about Grandpa Cox and the way he liked his corn?
Yes, Grandpa Cox liked his corn healed up. My dad and Grandpa Clay both chop out the weeds. They don't need to be healed up. They'll grow just as good. So if you went to help him, you had to hold him up. And
He was
I ended
particular
up having to
about
go,
the help.
but one time Dad went over and Aunt Eulalia was working, and Grandpa was hoeing to the front, and Aunt Eulalia had to sit next row, and Dad had the back one, and going across the field. And Aunt Eulalia was a strong woman. She was tall and she was strong. Grandpa was short. Aunt Eulalia got out there a little piece, and she was catching up with Grandpa, and she passed him, and he said, "What are you doing, strutting your stuff?" And he said, Dad said, Aunt Eulalia walked behind, and Grandpa started getting more faster, and he said he would motion for Aunt Eulalia to move forward a little bit, and he would catch up her row as well as him. And they said by lunchtime, Grandpa was dragging it. He couldn't hardly go.
Oh, so Grandpa was having some fun with that.
Yeah, Grandpa was enjoying that, because especially when he said, "What are you doing, having fun?" "Oh no, straighten your stuff." "What are you doing, straighten your stuff?"
But your other grandpa had a really different disposition.
Oh, he was just like my dad. He was a super jolly guy. He had some unique features that we all liked. He would work in the fields of a day, and he had a chair that and you go have a picture of that. He has a chair that he would come in and sit in that chair every night.
Like a metal kind of glider chair that kind of would have come out of the 40s that you sit in the yard and just sit under a tree.
Yeah. And he would come in, he'd sit there for about 30 minutes to an hour, all depending on how tired he was. He'd sit there till he got to feeling better.
Huh. And his name was Mac, right?
Yeah, uh-huh. Yeah.
And did he like his grandchildren?
Huh?
How was his relationship with his
All
grandchildren?
the grandchildren loved him.
Mhm.
Yeah, we did.
Papa, what did your mom and dad think of all of your success in business coming up from where you started?
They was proud of their son.
Yeah.
They really was.
I was too.
Yes, you were.
When Frida come around, she was too. Another helper, though, down through the years, because Kendall gave me a lot of legal advice. And that's very necessary if you're in business. And he never did charge a penny. Even we're reaping the rewards now every month, because he told me about this retirement plan that this guy had that he thought I would be interested in. I'd already been given notice at Duncan Ford that I needed to remove my money because I was 70 and a half years old. So anyway, he gave me this advice to go see this guy, and I went and seen him, and he had a plan that guaranteed you 6% interest. I have been drawing off of that plan now for, I started drawing in 2016, what the federal government says I had to draw. Then I increased it when I retired completely. But that plan is worth more money today than it was when they put it in there. Even when everybody's money went like that, Mine went up because I got guaranteed 6% interest. Now they don't write that plan no more. But they did, and Hartford Insurance is who done it, and they give me a check every month.
Well, you've been good to Kendall too, so
Yeah,
y'all just
so
help each
I
other.
think my brother Kendall, he has been very helpful, and
Any other questions? This has been great.
You remember when you got your first light bulb? Do you remember when TVs and all that started coming out and stuff? What you thought of that?
yeah, you know, I can tell you the date I got my first TV.
You can?
Of course you
Yeah,
can.
it was in 1956, and I was living in an apartment up on the second floor of this house, and Eisenhower was being sworn in as his second term, and Mom and Dad come down and watched that on that little TV. It was a little TV about so big. I didn't have one of them big boxes and the little screen, but some of the people did. This was a General Electric, and it wasn't no bigger than that. And we watched the election.
Wow.
It ain't like it was today, though. They don't declare the winner in a couple of hours. We didn't learn anything, but we saw what maybe Virginia did. We saw probably what some of the East Coast states did. Big states like New York, they hadn't called that. They didn't have these computers that counted the votes, you know. They doing it all by hand. Yeah. But that was the first TV. It was a good little TV. Now the next one I got was a Sears, and it was a floor model, and it had a 19-inch screen. But it was black and white because color wasn't out yet. The first color TV we had was after me and Frida was married, and Ford Motor Company had bought Philco, and which later developed the GTE cell phones, and we got a Ford Philco because it was a Ford tractor dealer, and we got it for almost nothing. So that was the first color TV we had, and it
People were
was a good
still
one.
people were still turning channels though. Not
Oh yeah, yeah.
there were knobs. No remote action.
Kendall was bringing up how y'all raised me for the first 3 months of my life. And I really don't even know why. I know Mom was sick, but
Your mom had
Appendicitis. So
appendix-
you were at
rupture.
my house for a while,
Yeah, and
but then she got very sick.
yeah, and then we brought you here, and we kept you, and we had a lot of fun with you. Yeah, you had a lot of, you had your feet tied together. And the best thing was, the thing you had to watch, Josh, was not get in the way of those feet.
Those
that
little
was like
casts had to be changed every 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, because you were growing. So to not change them was going to get in the way of your growth. So it was kind of a big deal, right?
Yes, it was. But
And then things
anyway,
like changing diapers with all that business going on is also kind of a big deal.
and Rita had a hard time recuperating. She wasn't ever going back to work for a while.
She had her appendix, what do you call it?
It ruptured.
It ruptured. And it caused this widespread infection. So she was probably more ill than a lot of people who get appendicitis.
Oh yeah, I was sick with appendicitis, but they got it out before it ruptured. It was about to. But But he was a good little boy.
Yeah.
We enjoyed him, and he would.
He laughed a lot.
I told before y'all got here. I was holding him. We was going to go out to Domino's and get a pizza, and I was holding him upstairs there in the kitchen, and Frida went upstairs, and I said, Josh, holler, hurry up, Grandma. Hey, Ganny, hurry up, Ganny. And he said it. Hurry up, Ganny. And, well, we all laughed, and then we was going out to Domino's, and he kept on. We kept on laughing, and he kept on saying it. And all at once, he said, hurry up, Pawpaw. He thought if it was funny for Granny, it was funny for Pawpaw.
Yeah. When you came home to our house, Megan was just turned 1. So she thought you were her new doll that had come to the house. And you were
I'm sure I was really nice.
You were totally nice. Baby was one of your first words. It was cool.
Well, I think Jocelyn will probably end up getting a copy of this as well. You got any Jocelyn stories?
I told one about her before you come. Jocelyn was always a sweetie, but they came in from Cuba, Bobby, Joe, and Stacy and Jocelyn, and I met them at the Norfolk at the Navy station, and they flew in on a naval aircraft, and so whenever they got off the plane, Stacy saw me, and she was carrying Jocelyn, and she says, here, and I had Jocelyn. And anyway, we come on up the road, and she was very restless. She had enough, because they'd probably been traveling for many hours. So anyway, Stacy was in the back seat, and Bobby was in the front seat, and this was before you had all these rules about seat belts and child care. So Jocelyn was sitting on Bobby's knees, and she saw something that was familiar. She was looking out the windshield. She says, moon, moon. That was something she'd been seeing down in Cuba. Was the moon. And so anyway, we got here, and I think it was the next day, Bobby and Stacy was down here, and Jocelyn and Frida was fixing a meal. Jocelyn comes up the steps, and she walks over there in the corner where the broom closet is, and puts her face right up in the corner, and she says, stand in the corner, stand in the corner, stand in the corner. What she was saying was, Mom and Dad's been making me stand in the corner. She was telling Granny, because Granny was going to take her apart. But we was coming down the road one time. We usually met Stacy halfway after her and Bobby divorced. And we'd meet her up at Woodstock, and we would come back down the road with her. And she was sitting up there in the front, and she says, I want to stop over there, they got donuts. And I said, how do you know they got donuts? Said, you see all them police cars sitting over there? She says, that means they got donuts. She was right. We went off and went over and got a donut.
That was good.
Yeah. How about Zachy and Caleb? You all have done a lot of miles with those boys when they were little.
Let's
The
see.
trips down to Florida and bringing
Yeah.
them back.
Yes.
And we stopped a lot of places. One of the favorite places to stop with them, and they just loved it, was at St. Augustine, where the fort is, you know, and all. They just love. They go back in those things.
It's a great place.
But I can't think. They love going to Mill Mountain, and they love the picture there. They've got a mirror that makes you look like if you open your mouth is about like that. And they love that. And they said Dad, Grandpa always does funny things.
Well, you got them a lot on Christmas too, didn't you? You met Amy, yeah, and brought them up.
Yeah. We went down one year to Florida over, let's see, it's over from Orlando. I can't remember the little town there, but we went over there. We actually stayed in Orlando that night. And me and Crystal went with us that time. And we stopped, I called them and I said, will there be anything open on Christmas? Oh, everything's open. We got a fly in here.
Is that right?
They says everything is open on Christmas. They lied too. Nothing was open. And they even called the motel. They said, we know you're supposed to get breakfast, but since we don't have any other guests, do you mind if we don't serve you? I said,
Yeah, that's what they said.
I said, yes, I mind, because we don't have nowhere to get anything to eat if you don't. So anyway, they found something and they brought it to our room. And anyway, we eat, and Crystal called Disney World, and they had a place north of that had was open, and they was serving lunch. They had several guests there, and they were serving lunch. So we went over there and ate. But that night, Amy had lunch for us, or dinner, and then the next morning, of course, everything was open. But we went over, met Amy over there at a little fruit stand, and she brought the boys, and we brought them on home, and we had them then for several days. Funny thing happened at Easter with them. Amy sent up some fruit baskets, Easter baskets for them, and we was opening the Easter baskets there, and there was a little rabbit come up right there on that back patio, and Zachy, oh, the Easter bunny. It couldn't come no better. He got the Easter bunny that year right out there.
Well, Crystal was sort of the big sister at that point. I mean, she really enjoyed having those boys.
Oh yeah, because and she was good with them.
Sure.
Yeah, 'cause she practiced on you, didn't she?
She did. Yeah, there was like a 6 year
Big difference,
age
yeah.
difference. So yeah, she did practice on Megan.
Yeah, she enjoyed that.
Yeah.
So I know y'all did some traveling when I was little. What's some places that you've traveled to over the years?
Well, the first place we went to was Puerto Rico, and this was one we actually didn't win, we paid for. But another Ford tractor dealer called and said, we're getting up a group to go to down to Puerto Rico, and we can get you, American Airlines has a special running, airline tickets and the room and breakfast every day for a week for $469.
Wow.
Now, No, we had,
A little different.
Try 10 times that,
Yeah.
probably.
but anyway, we took that, that was per person, but we took that, and we truly enjoyed it. It's a beautiful place. It was. I think they still have trouble rebuilding, but it was a beautiful, beautiful place down there, and we truly enjoyed it. The first one we won was supposed to be to Italy, but they had a lot of uproar in Italy at that time, so we went to Austria,
Wow.
Really?
and we enjoyed that.
It was different, but we enjoyed the difference. So
Yeah, it was very good, and they really did a good job showing us around. In those towns like that where it speaks very little English, without Ford's expertise, it wouldn't have been much fun. But they took us around to different places. We went to where the what's the name of the one where they went over the mountain?
Sound of Music?
Sound of Music. We went to where Sound of Music was made. They took us. We spent a whole lot of time that day in that where Mozart was and different ones like that. It had a lot of history. And we went down to where they went over the mountain, where they got on the sailboat and sailed across and climbed the mountain. We went there we eat at a, what do they call it, Hunter's Cabin, Frida?
I think it was.
At the Hunter's Cabin, we eat lunch there. And it was really a pretty place. Every house had windows, planers on the windows. And they said it was very prestigious who could grow the prettiest flowers. The ladies just had a ball trying to beat the others out with those. And it was a very, very pretty place. A cute thing happened over there. We had one woman in the group that they should have taped her mouth shut, and she aggravated.
It wasn't me.
It wasn't me.
But she aggravated everybody to death. Well, they had a bathroom stop,
She ran you crazy.
and the guide said we were having an international pit stop. When we stop, you're Russian. When you come out, you're a Finnish. And let's see, what was the other one? Anyway, she had 3 different things. And this little old lady went in the bathroom, with the bathroom doors open backwards to what everybody else has ever had. And she couldn't open her door. She was pushing against it, and it needed to be pulled. She said, "I know y'all hate me, but you shouldn't have locked me in." And she just screamed bloody
Did you
murder.
unlock me? Yes, you did too.
Someone finally went over and pushed the door open for them. They were out, but
She says, "Oh,
You all got a good giggle though, didn't you?
we got a good laugh even. Let's see, the next time, I know we went to Ireland. Ireland is the place to go. Ireland feels like home to me and Frida. It was just,
it's more like Virginia."
it was just so good. And we eat dinner with the Ford Motor Company. They got Ford of Ireland. They kind of, when you get over in those foreign countries, you don't do much crossing from one country to the other. And you got to have your own. They had to have a Ford headquarters set up there if it's going to sell Ford product. See, Ireland is not part of England. It's its own country. And the president of Ford Ireland sat with me and Frida, and he was really interesting. He was really a nice guy to be with. One woman said as we was going over to this bar thing that they had, that they fed us in, she said, "I'm going to dance on the table tonight." And she got one too many, so she did get up and danced on the table.
She did. Oh.
But
She
it was
got
a place that
She found
they had locals back here that was a bar, but they had a room back here that had like a restaurant where they served groups. And Ford had it bought out for that night, and we had a good time there, and it was really just very good. We took a ride around the what was the name of the lake? You remember? I can't think of the name of the lake, but it's kind of famous. And the guy that was driving a Jostin cart had a horse, and he sat on the side, and we went around that lake, and he says, now this is where you can see the, what was the little old elves or whatever that comes up.
Oh, like the leprechauns?
Leprechaun. So this is where you can see the leprechaun. Now I'll tell you a little secret. The more Guinness that you drink, the more leprechauns you'll see.
He was telling the truth.
We didn't see no leprechauns, but it was a nice, something different, you know. And let's see, we went to Hawaii twice. Once with Ford Tractor as a dealer, and the next time we went was a parts manager from Duck and Ford. And there's a difference in how you're treated according to what your position is. When we was Ford Tractor dealer, we was treated as a parts manager for a Ford Tractor dealer.
We got behind everybody.
It was not quite the same, but it was good. The best part about the one with the Ford car dealer though was they give us a rental car, and two people, and a dealer here in Christiansburg and me over in Blacksburg. We got a rental car together, and he was about my age, and his wife was about Frida's age, and we really had a ball with
we
them.
enjoyed it. Yeah.
And we went up on, it was hot, it was pretty, and me and Frida didn't have a jacket. Who would want a jacket in Hawaii? And we went up on this mountain, and it was snowing, 10,000 foot up,
Good grief, it was
and it was snowing. And
something about that.
the guy from over here in Christiansburg let Frida wear his coat. He was real nice. So anyway, we didn't stay long up there, but it was, you
Couldn't
could,
stay long.
you could look. That thing has not
You
erupted
had to
for
go.
a long, long time. But you could look over the edge,
Really?
and you could see smoke coming up. It is still hot, even though it hasn't been hot enough to erupt. But there was some plants growing up there. Some kind of little flowers about that big around, and they was pretty. There weren't many, but there was some growing,
I wonder if the ground is warm from the volcano.
probably.
As you
That's
said,
what helped the flowers and
Yes.
kept them coming up.
yeah, even despite the snow,
Yeah.
the ground was warm.
Right.
Mm.
And then they would come on up through the,
Let's see, we went to where else, Frida? We went on a couple of cruises. I think y'all been on a cruise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first one we went on had no one on it but Ford Tractor dealers. And that was nice because everybody had the same things. You could talk to each other. And but one of the guys that we knew real well, him and his wife, gained 28 pounds that week.
Really?
Well, they had food all the time.
I like these
And I guess he
houses.
thought he's supposed to eat his part.
He's getting his money's worth.
Yeah. But the last one we went on was with the Ford car division as a parts manager, and you still had the midnight buffet and all that, but it was not exactly the same. And they had some things there that you had paid for. But we enjoyed all our trips.
You also took a trip to see Crystal in Spain.
Yes,
That's
that was super good.
Yeah.
We had someone with us that knew Spanish. Crystal can speak Spanish. And we get off the plane over there, and it says if you have more than $300 worth, please declare it. Well, I did have, because Crystal called and wanted me to bring certain things that she was going to give out at Christmas to these people that had been so good to her. And so anyway, we got that. Got off, and I went over to the counter. No one showed up. I went over where the suitcases and all was coming down. There's a man standing there, and I told him what I wanted to do. He said, "Go on." So we didn't have to declare it.
Huh.
But anyway, Crystal was there and met us, and we got on a train and rode back to Toledo. And that's a beautiful place, antique-ish. And I need to go to the bathroom.
Let's take care of that.
Well, you did